Welcome to Stormz Tech Corner, the Dungeon Crawler Network podcast on all things technical and gaming. I'm Stormzlord, co-guild master of the DCN Guild, Hands of Fate and ESO, council member of the Hands of Fate Guild and Ashes of Creation, and all-around fun guy. All right, next up we have an asset that we're going to mod. So this is going to be a primer on asset modification, which is a good way to get to know Unity. You'll get to see what other people have done. You get to make some changes. You get to see how it works, things like that. So let's talk about that. The first thing we have here is we have an asset. It's called Tic-Tac-Toe. It's available in the Unity Asset Store for free. So pull down Unity, which is free. Then go ahead to the Asset Store, which you brought up. Now you can type in Tic-Tac-Toe. You can type in Tic-Tac-Toe. It'll come up. I've already downloaded it and imported it into a project. So what you have here, it's Tic-Tac-Toe. This is an older primer. Now it includes a programming primer book, which you can look at. I really haven't. But it is an older one. So when you do import it, it's going to ask you to save your project because it's going to make some script changes, which it does. And then it works fine in this version of Unity, even though it was created for the 2014 version of Unity, which was quite a ways ago. So import it or download it, then import it, and then you have a project. What you have is a project. It's in Unity, and let's talk about what that means. So in Unity, when you start up Unity, you get to choose either a new project or a current project or whatever you want to do. We're choosing a current project. I have called it Tic-Tac-Toe, fair enough. This is their scene, how it looks. Looks pretty weird, huh? This is the scene. It is not how the game looks. The game looks like that without the overlaid words. You have the scene and the game, two different views in Unity. Now this is really a 3D game. This was back before Unity had Canvas and things we'll talk about. But this is a way that they was made like a 2D interface before Unity really provided for it. But we're going to change it to use the new 2D interface that Unity has provided. They're very helpful. All right, so let's move forward. Let's talk about Unity. Again, this is the Scene tab, the Game tab. Right, when you run the game, you'll see that it shows up in the Game tab. You can play the game. At the same time, you can look at the Scene tab and see what's there. You have the Asset Store, which we clicked on. We'll stop this now. Then you have the hierarchy. The hierarchy down here shows you your scene that you're working on, your different objects, and then their child objects. We'll talk about that in a second. Then you have projects on the right. You can see what they have in their project. Now there's documentation. I have imported a few other assets that I bought for another situation. So you're not going to be able to use it unless you use the same thing. Let me show you. Again, doesn't matter. I just picked some images that I wanted to use. I bought this for another project I worked on. So it's the Haneti 4K GUI UI kit. Actually, I bought it for the Guild Tools app, so no big deal. If you want to buy it, you can. Not that much. But it's got some good images. I thought that fits with what I was trying to do. And that's what I do. I buy and I integrate. So here's our project. Here's our folder. If you click on a project and the scene and the hierarchy, an object, you'll see that its properties are over here on the right. If that's where you have the tab, you can put it wherever you want. Based on how you're doing it. If you do a game that's horizontal like this one, you can have it wide. If you're doing a vertical one like a mobile game that's just portrait, you can do it that way as well. Do it portrait. They have these layouts over here where you can do wide. You could do tall, which would look weird. But let's go back to wide. I prefer wide when working at this one. Okay. Now we have to look at the scene view. You can click on objects, right, and they come up. Or you click on the object over here and they come up. You can see they're selected. You can size them. You can move them. You can move the screen if you want. You can move the screen sideways, forward. Whatever you're doing, this is in the scene. In the game, you can't do that. Right, this is the scene. You can move things around, change your view. I want to see it from the top. If it was 3D, which eventually we're going to make this one 3D, from the side, right, all sorts of things. Now in this project, we have a GUI. We have the board. We have the board cells, which are those, right, the pinkish ones. We have the different pictures representing words. And then we have a main camera. If you look at the scene from the top, pull out a little bit, you'll see there's the camera right there. It's looking forward this way. There's the preview. And if you look, that's what it's looking at, right? Doesn't matter where you're doing. We like to do it in this type of game. I do 2D. It's easier for me to work with the 2D when we're doing a 2D style game. Now, when we make this a 3D tic-tac-toe, we'll change it, but that's okay. We'll get there. All right, now Unity. We're still on the Unity editor. We still see the GUI, right? Now, there's the GUI, which is tied to the GUI handler script. One caveat you'll notice when we move over to the way I've refactored this, I like to name the object the same as the script. So in my case, the GUI handler script would be tied to a GUI handler object. But you'll see that later. Now, each of these objects on here are child objects of this parent. So when you reference a parent object or the GUI game object, you can, if you want to, in the code, reference each child. If you want to do that, that is one way to do it. All right, so you see the game objects, you see their child, you see the main camera, and then you see another one called the board, and then it has children with children of its own. Now, what you want to do is if we click on GUI, you'll see that this GUI script here, you can double click on that, or you can come over here and click Edit Script. That brings up Visual Studio if that's what you're coding in, and it's over on the other display, so I'll move it where you can see it as soon as it's done prepping. All right, so obviously I was doing some things earlier, so I'll hide those. All right, so this is the GUI handler, and this is the script. This is Visual Basic, and we're using C# in Visual Basic. So this is the author's code. He or she, they created this script that handles the GUI, our graphic user interface stuff, as well as a few other things. They've done it slightly differently than I would have done it, so we'll make some changes as we go forward. But you notice all these public variables here, right? They're public for a reason. If you make something public in a script and then attach that script to something, you'll see these pop up over here where you can fill them in by dragging and dropping. So you have an instantiated object without having to instantiate it in the code. Unity does that for you. Some people like it, some people don't. Personally, right now I prefer it. I like to be able to drag and drop and move them around instead of having to come in the code and change it if we want to. But that's okay. That's the way I do it. You'll see a couple other things that they have all these child objects. They have all these different objects and all these images over here, but they're actually transforms. So we'll talk about transforms some other time. But for now, just realize they're different objects put in there to reference during the code. Because if you put them in here, this button play, if you take this one here, this button play, he dragged and drop, or they drag and drop, and then that becomes instantiated as soon as you start. Now there's a start method here, or function call, that it's actually, and so if you've done some object coding, you'll notice that it can be inherited from earlier classes. So if you haven't done any object coding, I would stop for a second, go take a C# tutorial, go take an object programming tutorial, take a Java tutorial, Smalltalk, whatever type of object programming you want to do a tutorial on that, because that's not what this is. But I'll talk about, inheritance and instantiation and things like that, game objects and all this. Not going to really belabor the point of how to program in objects. I'm assuming you already know how to do that. If you don't, There's plenty of them out there. Look them up. I'll list a couple below that are pretty good. So start. It does whatever the earlier things of start does. And then it comes into this class. It creates a game info object, right? Checks the main camera, does some different things. It's jiving around, doing some stuff. It's great. It does a bunch of other things. And to me, I walked through this class. I like this class, but it does some things I don't think this particular class should do. In the way my brain works, and this is just myself, objects that are GUI and are handled by the GUI need to be handled by the GUI. Objects that are not, AI, anything else like that is behind the scenes that is not directly related to the graphical user interface shouldn't be in the GUI class. I would like to be able to completely strip out the GUI class, put a brand new one on there, and nobody would know. Right? That's just the way I like to code. I've always coded that way. Now again, whether you're in Java or C# and you grab an asset, or in JavaScript within Unity, but you take it and we're going to modify it. So how are we going to do that? Well, we walked through this. We did I looked around, I looked what functions there are, what objects there are. And within Visual Studio, you can see the objects and the methods and the properties and all that. And you can do that. All right, check it out, look around, and then go, probably wouldn't do it the way I would do it. But let's talk a couple more things before I move on. When you look at button play, which again is over here, let's go to button play. You notice button play is an object, right over there. This game object. You can change colors if you want, but we're not going to. There's a couple things to it, right? These are called components. They're components below an object. Now you can take this reference over here, button play, and you can reference any one of these components that you want if you want to. That's one way you can remember to instantiate one object and reach all those below. Now it takes a little more on the coding to do that. So usually I go a bit deeper, and in a button I will split these out, and I'll show you how I do that. Now notice they have a 2D collider, right? This is prior to the button user interface from Unity. So it was a unique way of doing it. It's a good way of doing it, right? Put a sprite renderer, a collider, so when you click on it, it clicks, right? It's a raycast, it's a click. Doesn't matter if it actually is supposed to be 2D or 3D. All right, so that's the way this person set this up. Like I said before, what I like to do is take something, modify it to what I would call my standards. Again, they're my opinions. They're not everybody's opinions. Coding, like I will say over and over again, is an art as well as a science. There is multiple ways to do everything you need to do. You can have large arguments on which way is better. To me, as long as it works and you understand it, that's what counts. And the person behind you has to understand it as well. So you got to put some pretty good comments in there as you go along. And look at your spelling a little bit. Okay. So now let's move over to the refactored version, which is what I've started working on. And we're going to work on together in this episode and probably others. It may take a couple. So let's open the scene, menu scene, refactored. Okay. Now, looks a little different so far. What I've done is I use, or what I like to call frames. I have pieces on a mobile window or a screen window, console or PC or whatever, and I have frames. That's the way I look at them. I don't call them windows. To me, they're not really windows. They're frames, just because of the way they work for me. Now, if I were to press play, give it time to gyrate, it works exactly as it did before. I didn't change the code they wrote. I didn't change the asset they've done. What I wanted to do was refactor it in my standards and do it in such a way that I could run it in the old way and continue to look at it and then look at it a new way if I wanted to. So what I've done is I've already created frames, which I said before. So you can take this in the inspector, which is you're looking at the GUI object. Here's the inspector. I turn that off, turns off everything that's under GUI. It is no longer active. Now we're going to go into the canvas. So the canvas is the new or a newer way of doing 2D for Unity. You have different inspector properties for this canvas. I'm not going to go into how to use a canvas. I'm not going to explain what a canvas is for other than 2D interactions. This is, again, go get a different tutorial, go get a different one. This is my way of looking at the code. This is my way of changing it and trying to explain to you how I learn code, and maybe hopefully you will learn code the same way. Take it apart, put it back together, see what you can do. So we didn't write it their way. Now what we'll do is we'll turn on the canvas and click back to scene. Now that doesn't look quite right, so the background isn't quite where it was before. So what I'm going to do is make the background a little bigger. The background should cover at least the whole window, if not a little more. All right. Now when I press play, you'll see it's starting to look like my version of tic-tac-toe, which is misspelled, so we'll have to change that. It's a tac-tac-toe, I guess. And I'm going to make mine behave a little differently. Theirs, when they wrote it, again, let's go back to their version of it. All right, now one thing I like about frames is the ability to change things quickly. I have code different ways. You pick whether you want X or O, it swaps the other one. We're going to do the same thing. You pick whether you want human or computer, and then you press play. Now it says player 1. You can click there. Now player 2, it's going to move. Mine's going to work the same way, but I want it to look a little different. I think it's a little non-intuitive the way they have it. Now I will also put an X here. Let's play a game of tic-tac-toe, which I know I won't win, but it's a draw, right? Let's shall we play a game? So there we go. It's a draw. And that's how they came up. And they put it in. So they come back to, hey, play. You can play again. A couple things, like I said, I want to do differently. I would clear the board at the end, which we'll do. I would change play and design may look more like a button, which you saw that I did. Now, let's go back here. Once again, look at the other one. The canvas, what I have is a background, right? And then within that background, I have then a title, which will change the spelling of that while we're here. Let's make that tic-tac-toe. All right, see how that works? Change the text right there. Then we have that. And then you have what's called a frame. I have a starter frame, a player frame, and then a game on frame. Right now the game on frame is actually not on, it's turned off. The player frame is turned on, and the start frame is turned on. You'll notice within the start frame I have one object. I have a child called button play. Within that button play you'll see there's a text. Button play, the child of start frame, has a button, and this is one of the newer Unity scripts, the button, where you set an image. You either drag and drop it from your project, which we could do. If we went over here and we picked an image under textures, and we picked one over here, you could go in and just drag and drop it onto that image. What I like to do also is you can click that little button, and then you pick on the particular one, or you take it and you drag and drop from over there if you want. So what I've done is, you notice the interface really is very similar. It's not different that much. It behaves the same way, but it looks different. I have a title. I have a button surrounding the play, or the word play, because it's intuitive. It's a button, you can push it. Then we have player 1, player 2, and then click to change. Now what's going to happen, it doesn't happen yet, and we'll talk about that, and we'll do some of it. You can click that X, and that'll swap those two like it did on the other game. Same thing with human or computer. If you click on human, it'll change to computer, and vice versa. It's just not working yet. We're going to get it to work together. So how's that? Now, that works. If you press play, player's one turn. That's as far as I got. right? So we're going to work on that too. All right, so what did I do? Notice we have the frame again. We talked about that. Button play. We have the text. Now, what I've done in button play, you have a button script. At the bottom of that script, you have on click. You can tell it what object over here, right? In this case, the GUI manager. You could also drag and drop it if you want, but I do it this way, going through GUI manager, type it in. And then you go down here and you can select what function. Well, we're going to pick shall we play a game. It's because I like war games. Now what I've done is I've created a function in an object called the GUI manager. Now remember, I like to say that the GUI needs to control the GUI, the mid controls the mid, the back end controls the back. This is the pattern I use. I like to use an MVC pattern. You have a model, a view, and a controller. But GUI, mid, and back, same thing. So if you click on this GUI object, GUI manager, you'll see that it has got a GUI manager script, and it's the same. Double click on it, kind of brings up Visual Studio. What I've done so far is I've gone in and I've cut and pasted some functions out of the GUI handler script over to the GUI manager script. All right, so I started a new script. I put in my public objects. They're going to be there. Notice these public objects in the GUI manager look a little similar, named a little different because I have them set up differently, different objects. I'm going to continue to use their G-info or game info object. I like that in their code. What I've done is I've taken what code they had in their mouse down, because you used to be, I mean, you still could do it, but you used to have to interrogate every mouse click and find out what button it was and do a whole bunch of if-thens. And in this case, they had a button play, right? So if the transform was button play, you do this code. And that's great, and that's awesome. I like the newer way of doing it with the canvas. We can split it up. You can split it up here too, but you don't have to worry about the button clicks. The objects that Unity has put together will do it for you. So you notice that GUI Manager has these different things. If you look at the button play, you'll see again, there's button play and there's GUI Manager, which you talked about. It'll call that shall we play a game. If you want to change the image again of that script or that button, right, I just click there, click it. Let's say we don't want to do gray, we want to do green. So we changed it to green, right? That's all we had to do. This is what I like. Again, you're separating the GUI from the function, right? They're not the same. They're separate. They need to be able to be replaceable if you need to. If I want to, in 2 years, change this front end, I shouldn't have to change the back end. Now, on this person's code, I did have to cut and paste some things out of a GUI handler that handles more than just GUI, but that's okay. That's what they wanted to do. I want it a little different. So what I have, we play a game, we start the function. Now we take the G-info get player function, right? This G-info, it's an object. If you notice, game info. And if we click on GUI Manager, you'll see a GUI info object, which we drag and drag over there. Again, because I wanted Unity to instantiate it, didn't want to have to code that myself, so we did it that way. Again, some people do, no big deal. But the GUI info is going to get the player information. That's its job. It's got other things to do, but I want it to do that. That's not for the GUI to do. That's for the game information object to do. We then have a game start setup, which if you look down here, here's game start setup. It's a method. I've got for reference the code they used for what they were doing in their particular portion of the GUI handler. I've modified it, so I just want to do this, right, which sets up the players and sets up the objects that are going to start the game. Then I do start get frame on, or excuse me, get on frame to set active, which means it makes it visible, turns it on, makes it available to use. So right now, if you look at game on, it's off. But you notice when I turn it on, I'll do that now, right? But that didn't happen, right? Notice that button's still there. Okay. So if you go over here, what I also do is I make that change. So we're going to stop recording at 26-ish and take out that little question because I think I did something different. So we'll look at that one. We're going to start at 26:25. All right, so 26:25. You click on the game on frame, you turn it on. The player frame turns it off. Now, see, you notice when I start this with the GUI manager there that says play, when I press play, it should disappear. So there's some more coding we need to do. We'll talk about that. We'll look at it. So we're going to stop at this moment. We're going to look at some of the code and then come back and do some code. All right, so we've seen these objects. We saw the GUI handler. All right, and that is pretty much the way I've pulled it so far. I've set up these different objects down here in the player frame, player 1 piece, player 2. I changed the image here. I have an image separate from the button image, small x, because what I want to do is be able to turn it away from being a button and not clickable. I want to make it intuitive that this is no longer a button you can push. Now, I could just gray it out, but I didn't want to do that. I want the X to remain there, but I don't want it to be a button anymore. Same thing with the words human and computer on the button. Once you press play, those to me, the button part should go away and just say the word human or the word computer. So it's 28. We'll look about that one. All right, 28. All right. So again, the button has two parts. It has the buttons, well, three parts. The button script, which is player 1 piece right here. It has the button image of the actual button itself, and then the button image on top of the button, because I want to be able to change both the button image and the button visual portion itself as we go along, as the game moves forward. All right. So same thing with player 2, player 1. I have a player 2 label. I have a player 2 button. Notice these are all child objects of each. So if I make one disappear, the other ones below it disappear if I want to. That's what I do with frames. Again, player frame disappears. It goes away. Start frame, it goes away, right? If we turn the game on frame, you'll see game on. And then if we turn player frame off, right, things change. So that's what I'm working on. We'll come back, we'll make some code changes, and then we'll see how it works. All right, and we're back now. We've gone ahead, we've done some further changes on this. We've got it to the point where the game is going to start when you say press play. It's all set to go. But that's where we're going to stop. So we're going to do a couple things here, look what we've done, get it all set, show you how it works. And then in the next episode, we're going to look at how we're going to change the game board and change the scripts that run it. One of the things I've noticed as modifying this asset is the game board and the GUI handler are extremely tied together. Right now, to me, I don't like that. This person did it, and that's fine. That's the way they did it. I'm not criticizing what they've done. I just prefer it to be, again, model view controller. You have the front end, the middle layer, and the back end. To me, the front end is the player, X human computer. It is the board itself. The AI, any saving, anything like that has got to be, to me, totally unrelated, not tied together. And the way this is, they are tied together. So we're going to have to do some changes next episode. We're going to pull them apart and then make it a little more 3D-ish than it is. All right. So let's go ahead and look what we have. So right now, currently, after some modifications, still comes up. Look, I changed the spelling. Tic-Tac-Toe version 2. You press play. You can click to change. It's going to change X and Y. right? Or X and O, excuse me. If you change X, automatically the other player has to change as well. And then you can have human or computer. Either one, you can do human versus human, computer versus computer, however you want to do it. Now we're going to talk about how that we've done that. We do also press play, and that's as far as we got. Right? We'll make some more changes next week. So now what did we do? So I've done a couple things. One, I started to pull apart, and I here had to modify a little bit of their original code, which I'm trying not to do. I'm trying to make it set up so we can have two examples, their code running and not. Not sure if that's going to work. I'm probably going to have to compile their version of it and show you it running, and then show you our version of it running. Little errors coming up, but we'll talk about those in a second. So what we've done is, you notice that we still have the background, the title, start frame. Now what I've done is I've moved this click to change label and then left the play button in there. So when we make the play frame or start frame go away, those two things disappear, because you don't want to tell the person they can click on it when it's no longer a button. All right, so we did that. Now, if you look at the player piece, we've done a little differently than I had first intended, but it works out. We have player one piece object, right? It's a child of player frame, which is a child of canvas, but also player frame, again, player one piece. Player one piece has a couple, or three actually, child objects as well. It has this P1 button image, which is the small button, gray button behind it. There's an X image and there's an O image. If you notice, the image O is currently not active, so it's invisible. Image X is visible, okay? So all we've done is we swap one visible and invisible. Now we do that on button press. So player one, we have what's called you have the GUI manager, right over here on the right, on the on-click event. It's listening to the on-click of this particular button. The GUI manager functions swap piece, right? Now swap piece has swap piece has no arguments. So it's really easy. What we've done is, let's switch back to Visual Basic. Within GUI manager, if we go to the swap piece method, you'll notice that what I've done is fairly simple. I've just taken the player one piece image X, player one piece image O, same thing for player two and player two X and O. I've taken the set active method and I've said, well, change it to the default, whatever it was not now, right? So the not dot active self says if it's true, make it false. If it's false, basically make it true. So it does the swap. So that does the visual. Right, that does the front end. Now, I could go ahead and make changes in this for the back end, but again, I don't want to do that, right? Because I want the AI to be involved in the game info script. So I have a variable here calledginfo. Now,ginfo is pretty interesting to me.Ginfo, what I've done is game info. I have created a variable inside the game info script called, it's a public state game info instance. Now what that means then, when I come down to the awake function, I say instance equals this, which means that this object or this script is cloned into that instance variable. So that's one way of putting it. Whenever you reference that instance from another script or this script, it's the same variable. It's the same object. So you're able to reach out from other scripts to this one and so forth. So what I've done then is I've come into GUI Manager. I put a private game info, ginfo, and then in the start, I've done nothing, right? But you'll see that I do. We're going to do it. I have set it to the value right here on the awake. I have them in a different order for some reason. Ginfo equals gameinfo dot instance. All right, so that's what we set up in the game info script. So this game info script, which you can't see me pointing at, this instance is cloned into g-info. So we're referring, or it's a reference to the same object, same set of memory. So that allows us to get those variables and make method calls. So you'll notice in the swap piece, I then do g-info.swap player pieces. So it comes over to game info. It does it in memory, right? It goes to swap player pieces. And it says, okay, take the current value of X. Well, in this case, I'm setting up the default. They're doing this. That's fine. But I then go to say take hold. So take the current value, P1 hold equals the current value of player 1. What's he playing as, X or O? Same thing for player 2. Is he playing as player X or O? And then step below, I say player 1 equals P2 hold, because player 1 is not what player 2 was, and vice versa. Right? So there you go. It swaps it through. And that's what it does. I left this as a reference. This is how he or she or they did the code, and that's fine. I think it was a bit overkill. Every time you need to change the X and Y type, you're also resetting the other variables. I prefer them more split up, but you can do it either way. I like having the set player that has all the variables when you're going to construct something, but I also like the availability to have just particular pieces through methods that, swap piece or whatever. So that's what that does. So when I click on that, swap piece does, guess what? It swaps the piece, right? So it's going to move it over. Now, the next one, you notice the human, the type, or player 2 type, right? It has a function. Goes to the GUI manager on the on-click of that particular button. It passes in, calls a function called GUI manager swap type. But swap type also has a parameter, because I want to know which button this is. It could be button 1, it could be button for player 2. I don't know which one it is if you just call the method. So what I do is this player 2 type, right, is this object. I want to know the name of this button, player 2 type. So all I did was drag that over and drop it in there as a parameter. Now, if you notice on the player 1 type, I dragged the player 1 type over there and did it that way. And again, it's swap type. So if you'll over here and look at GUI manager, we have the swap type. The parameter is a game object, right, or a button. So that is telling me that get the name of that, get the player being, so is it a human or is it an AI? Then based on the button name, if it starts with player 1, this is the player 1 button. If it starts with player 2, it starts with player button, or player 2, so that's fine. And then I go ahead and I change it from, all right, so give me what the current player is. Is this player human? Is player AI or computer? And then swap it. Now, I not only swap it, right, but I also change it at the other layer, which we'll talk about, because I didn't swap it. Well, that's not going to work, because I've swapped the visual, but I haven't swapped the actual player type. Oh, there we go. No, I did. I lied. I set up a method swap player type over g-info. I forgot about that. So I did make a few changes to the game info script. One of them being this player pieces, so it could swap, right? Even though I try not to touch their assets if I can make it, not do it. But this to me belonged here in the game info script. And again, back to it's art and science. There's going to be a lot of discussions of where the best place for a method is. What's the most efficient? What's the fastest? Sometimes I go blah, 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 blah. Is it really going to matter? It's so fast, and it's a small tic-tac-toe game. It's not going to matter. If you're talking of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of transactions, then yes, discussions like this make sense, because you're talking a lot of time. You're taking a batch job that could be running 26, 28 hours and taking it down to 8 hours just by moving things around. So that's one thing to think about, but in this one, we're not going to do that. So what I've done is I've marked this as mods below. I've moved some things in here, and I'll be doing some more next week when I move some visuals around, because I don't want them in here, but they're in here right now. Also get player being, because they don't have a way of getting just the player information of being and passing it back. So I have that as in there as well. And then swap player type. Again, in this case, I pass in a player name or player number, excuse me. And then based on that player number 1 is 0, player number 2 is 1. That's the way C# works, right? So we have that set up. And then if it's human, I switch it to AI. If it's AI, I switch to human. Either way, that's fine. Because what I'm doing is in the board script, in the script that takes care of the board management of X and O, X and O, and X and O, it needs to know whether you're an AI or human and whether or not it's going to make the move, or you can wait for you to make the move. Same thing for either X and O. It needs to know, are you playing as X or are you playing as O? So not only do we have to change the screen, which we did, we have to change the back end, and that's what I did in here. All right, so in this case, get player being, I'm just getting it. In here, player type, I'm swapping it. In here, swap player pieces, I'm swapping it again, and then things like that. So again, what we have is if we do a play on this, boink. All right, it comes up, we press play, player 1's turn, then boom, you're going to start playing. But notice these turned away from buttons. I'm not thrilled with the look. Not sure what I'm going to do about that, but right now, they're not buttons, and the click to change goes away. Again, that's restarted again, and there's an error down here, which we'll get rid of that next week. Right, we can switch to whatever we want. All right, and then swap those, which is the same way it was working on their game. And let's go over here and turn off the canvas we're working on. Turn on theirs, and hopefully I didn't mess it up at all. I did change that frame, make sure we have that right. So we have that, we come in, there's play, human, computer, computer, human, press play. It's going to play, swapping back and forth whose turn it is, putting in X and O's. All right, so we know that the X and O's work. We're going to pause again. We're going to play. It's going to start. Let's walk at it. It's going to do X and O's, walk through. Right? I'm assuming it's going to be a draw every time. If you've seen Mind Games, you'll know why. Excuse me, War Games. It's not a draw. Wow. And they swapped the background. That was something I did. Interesting. It wasn't a draw. So they had a faulty AI or purposely messed it up. All right. So that's the way it's going to work when we're doing it. However, we're just going to have a different front end. And we are going to change these different ways it looks. To me, it looks a little old-fashioned the way it is. So that's all right. We're going to change it. We're going to swap it up. But it's a good start, right? Again, it was a free asset. We're learning how to modify an asset so that we can use it as our own asset. That's it for now. If you have any questions, please let me know. Send me questions about this primer, depending on who you're talking to. Thank you very much for tuning into us today. Again, this is Stormzlord. You can find all my podcasts and all of the Dungeon Crawler Network podcasts on dungeoncrawlernetwork.com. You can catch us on iTunes. You can catch us on Spotify. You can catch us on Google Music, all over the place. Stormzlord at twitter.com. You can see some of our other work at Digital Pepper Studios at digitalpepperstudios.com, or check on Android or iOS for the current games we have out there, which still need to be updated, but, holiday's been busy. All right. Thank you. Have a good week. Bye.